Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1182, 1182, Monday, July the 6th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the news of the last 24 hours. We'll start with an update. There is some new information regarding the Ghislaine Maxwell situation. And as far as we know, at this hour, it's about 9 o'clock p.m. on Sunday evening. And at this time, as far as we know, Maxwell is still alive and kicking. She's alive and kicking as of right now. How much longer that will last, I don't know. I give it a week. But let's go ahead and get to the newest information, updated information. So it looks like Maxwell is actually, her case is being handled in the Southern District of New York by the Public Corruption Unit. The Public Corruption Unit. Now, normally, things associated with sex crimes, sex trafficking, and things and such are generally handled by the Violent and Organized Crime Unit. So, in this case, Maxwell's case is being handled by the Public Corruption Unit, which typically does not do sex trafficking cases unless it involves a public official or officials, government employees, elected or appointed, who may be involved in bribery, embezzlement, or fraud. Let me repeat that. Maxwell's case is being handled in the Southern District of New York by the Public Corruption Unit, which typically does not do sex trafficking cases unless it involves a public official or officials, government employees, elected or appointed, who are involved in bribery, embezzlement, or fraud. Again, normally these types of cases, if it's just dealing with sex abuse, trafficking, things like that, including underage minors, things and such, it normally is handled by the Violent and Organized Crime Unit. But in this case, it's handled by the Public Corruption Unit, which means that it's possible that Maxwell is actually being targeted not so much for her crimes and being involved in all this, even though some of those charges do involve her personal involvement in these sex crimes with minors. But the fact that it's being handled by the Public Corruption Unit would suggest that she's not being targeted in this particular case as a suspect, but rather as a witness. But she could be a co-conspirator if it involves public officials. Now, all this doesn't mean that it ends here. What it means is that this is the first step. Now, at some point, once she's been targeted as a witness or a co-conspirator who would have information on public officials, and they would get her to turn and testify against them public officials, then she could be charged again by the Violent and Organized Crime Unit for her personal deviant behavior with minors in future cases. This also suggests that there are high-profile government figures who are associated with Epstein and Maxwell. It's also possible that this original series of charges she's facing and the fact that it's being handled through this Public Corruption Unit could indicate that they are targeting officials in Florida that gave Epstein the sweetheart deal earlier in his earlier case back about, 10 years ago. And of course, it's likely that in association with these types of investigations by the Public Corruption Unit, there could be bribes involved. Bribes. Now, we've learned some other things from some other reports, that this does not just target high-profile wealthy men. Apparently, this is also looking at some potential high-profile women. Wealthy, powerful women who are also interested in little girls. And there's talk, of course, from this newest accuser that there were orgies which involve both men and women, including Maxwell herself and other wealthy, powerful women. And some of these women were wealthy, powerful women on their own, some because they were married to a wealthy, powerful man, or both. Two of those women have been named. I am not familiar with them, but they're wealthy, elitist women who are obviously interested in these types of orgies, which involve both young girls and men. So these are some very, very freaky people, I guess you might say, with some very sick, sexual tendencies. These are some very serious, seriously twisted sexual deviants. So it's targeting both powerful men and women. And these are not just men who like young girls. These are women involved who are, I assume the term would be bi. They do men and women, and that would include young girls. So here, picture this. We have these orgies going on Epstein's Island or in one of his homes, where you have a combination of wealthy, powerful men and women, and they're bringing in these young girls. Now, we haven't heard anything about any young boys at this time, but at this time, it's simply young girls, which suggest that these women are obviously either lesbian or bisexual. And of course, it suggests from this most recent accuser that Ghislaine Maxwell herself is bi, that she's interested in both women and men. So that is something there. Now, there's also this whole backstory conspiracy, which I don't want to get too deep into because I have not dug into it a lot, but I know there's other people, I've watched their videos that discuss something else. It's sort of a background, and when you read that, it begins to cross my mind that it's very possible that we may be looking at this thing all wrong. We might be looking at this as Maxwell being sort of Epstein's employee, to use, I guess, just a general term. But what if it's the other way around? What if Epstein was working for Maxwell? See, because before Epstein was in the picture, and here's where it gets into some pretty wild conspiracy, but apparently there's some evidence to back it up. Apparently, Maxwell's father, which is where she got all of her money, his name was Robert Maxwell. He was a media mogul, very, very wealthy guy, had a big yacht, lots of homes, lots of money, and apparently he had an association with Israeli intelligence. And Israeli intelligence would oftentimes like to use their association of Mr. Maxwell because of his ability with all of his money and connections to attract certain people into this type of activity, which it appears he may also have been involved in, which is why his daughter may be so twisted. And apparently the Israeli intelligence would sometimes use Maxwell, and there would be certain people Israeli intelligence would be targeting that they wanted to compromise so that they could manipulate them politically or whatever. So they would have Maxwell get these targets of Israeli intelligence into compromising situations with women or possibly even underage girls, to have something on them that they could use to achieve a political goal. So then Maxwell dies under some serious circumstances, some suspicious circumstances. He dies. And therefore, Ghislaine Maxwell inherits all of Daddy's money. Now, he was in a lot of trouble at the time, and it suggested he may have committed suicide because he was having serious financial problems with his media empire. But apparently that got worked out because he left Ghislaine Maxwell a lot of money. So now the old man's out of the picture. And he had been the one that Israeli intelligence was using to procure women or young girls and to get them hooked up with these targets of Israeli intelligence so they could be compromised. So this is a racket was being run. It's very likely that at that time, Maxwell was working for Daddy. Maxwell was the one recruiting for Daddy on behalf of Israeli intelligence, which would mean both Maxwell and her father were assets of Israeli intelligence, whose primary objective in working for Israeli intelligence was to procure women and possibly minors to put into compromising situations with targets of Israeli intelligence. So the old man dies. That leaves Maxwell herself, Ghislaine Maxwell. And somewhere around that time is when she meets Epstein, just prior to her father's passing away or death or murder or suicide, whatever you want to call it. It had been just prior to that, a couple of years prior to that, when she was first crossed paths with Epstein. So maybe he was like her father, a wealthy guy, connected guy, had a relationship with people who may have been targets of Israeli intelligence, and maybe he got pulled into the game. Then when the old man dies, Epstein essentially comes in and takes his place. And Ghislaine Maxwell continues doing what she had always been doing, procuring women and minors to use as targets for Israeli intelligence. So she essentially continues what she's doing, and Epstein is simply fills in for the old man who's now kicked the bucket. And the beat goes on. La-di-da-di-dee, la-di-da-di-da. Doom, 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 doom. The beat goes on. Yep, that's what we may be looking at here. Now, I doubt that they're going to go that deep in this investigation. It's hard to say. You're starting to mess around with some pretty serious issues when you start getting into the intelligence stuff. And I think that is why that they said in the case in Florida that they gave Epstein such a sweetheart deal, because as they begin to delve into the investigation, they begin to cross paths with intelligence. And once you cross paths with intelligence, you get the old government line, sorry, but you're now crossing into intelligence activities, and that's where you got to stop what you're doing. Because now you could compromise national security. So these types of activities can be hidden behind intelligence, national security. And that's how people like Epstein and probably old Mr. Maxwell and Ghislaine Maxwell herself and others like them are able to do what they do with almost immunity, because they get hooked up with intelligence, which becomes part of national security, and now all of that stuff is off the table. Because they'll say, well, as much as it is bad that they're procuring these women and doing all these horrible things, they're providing a service to intelligence which is benefiting national security, and therefore we have to overlook it, because national security is more important than dozens or hundreds of minor girls being raped and abused by wealthy billionaires associated with intelligence agencies. That may be what we're looking at here, which is another reason why it would be very convenient if Ghislaine Maxwell were to achieve room temperature as soon as possible. If she makes it through the week, I will be very impressed. So that is the latest on the Maxwell situation. Again, the first part of what I told you is what's being reported. The second part about the intelligence conspiracy with the Israeli intelligence, that is not something coming from official channels or being discussed in any way, shape, or form. I'm just suggesting that that's out there. But what is actually being reported is what I first told you. The Public Corruption Unit is handling this not the Violent and Organized Crime Unit, which means it's likely that Maxwell's the focus on her right now is probably as a witness and probably as a co-conspirator, but the target right now appears to be public officials. Public officials, government employees, elected and appointed. That appears to be the targets right now, more than Maxwell herself. The charges against her are probably there, more than anything else, to be able to have a lot to throw at her, to compel her to talk. Because right now, they're probably not totally focused on her primarily. They're focused on these other people. But now once this is done, then whatever comes out and what's learned in the future, then this could be turned over to this other group in the Southern District of New York, the Violent and Organized Crime Unit, and they might personally go after Maxwell herself for her sex crimes with minors. So it's all a bit foggy right now, but this is the latest word, and I think we just have to watch this as almost like a day-by-day sort of thing. I expect that tomorrow morning she will be probably transported down to where Epstein was when he achieved room temperature with a little help from his friends. Yep. Gonna die with a little help from my friends. Gonna die with a little help from my friends. Help from my friends. Yes, she could die with a little help from her friends. Now, Trump, of course, on July 4th, giving his speech out there at Mount Rushmore. And, of course, he announces in his speech that he's going to create this national garden, which will be filled with historical monuments to American heroes. And he named off about 30 from a list that they currently have. And it's a sort of a who's who of historic Americans dating back to the Revolution and beyond. Includes just a wide variety of people, from athletes, presidents, politicians, judges, blacks, whites, men, women. It runs a gamut of sort of historical figures in American history. Now, this is a brilliant move by Trump, because it kind of forces the Democrats, Joe Biden and the Democrats, into either endorsing this idea or poo-pooing this idea. If they endorse it, they're going to turn off their left wing of their base big time. If they do not endorse it, they'll look like prudes and anti-American, anti-patriotic people to the people in that center-right, particularly independents. This is the type of issue that could rip the independents away from the Democratic candidate. Trump essentially is drawing a line in the sand and saying, are you with the patriots and the preservation of our history, or are you with the radicals who want to destroy our history? And so initially there'll be a lot of spin by the Democrats and by their friends in the left-wing media to try to question Trump's motives in wanting to build this national garden. That'll buy him about a week or two. But eventually, Trump, of course, is not going to let this go. He's going to make sure to get this going so that it's playing out through the election season. And at some point throughout the election season, in fact, quite often through the meat and potatoes part of the election season, which is the post-convention part up to Election Day, he is going to put this on the front burner and tweet about it all the time. He's going to force Biden and Democrats running in races all across the country to either come out and support the National Garden with historical monuments to American heroes or oppose it. Puts him in a real tough pickle politically. And this could move independents away from the Democrats if they take the wrong position. Now, if they take the position that they agree that it will be a good thing to do this, then of course they really hurt themselves on the left. And that's what they're desperately clinging to and holding on to, believing all these lefties are going to come out and vote for them. Now, I don't believe that's the case. I think some of them will, but these people are rioters, not voters. People like us are voters. People like them are rioters. Don't make the mistake of thinking all those people that are rioting are going to be voting. And many of them despise Democrats as much as they do Republicans. Remember, a lot of these people were originally part of the boycott Wall Street crowd. So a lot of these people are also Bernie Sanders supporters. And they have no love for the establishment whatsoever. So I think it's a good move by Trump. It's a good political move, and I think it's good for the country. Yeah, they tore down 10 statues. Trump will build 100. They tear down 100, he'll build 1,000. And they will be federally protected because they'll be on federal property. See how that works? Never underestimate President Trump. He's usually quite a few chapters ahead of everybody else in the playbook. He's like the Bill Belichick of politics. Well, I actually expected over the weekend for there to be a lot more acting up by Antifa than we actually saw. There were a couple of hot spots. They did have a fairly major presence in D.C., and Georgia, and a couple other places, but I think we got a feeling of exactly what their strength is over the weekend. And it doesn't appear that their numbers are large enough that they can ascend on multiple cities in large numbers. They appear to be able to put a certain amount of people into the game, but they largely rely on the much larger numbers of the BLM movement. And they infiltrate the BLM movement and radicalize what parts of it that they can. Now, this is having some negative effect too, because some of the organizers of the original Black Lives Matter, which really they just wanted to have better relations with police, wanted to sit down and talk about improvements they could make. They were looking for political solutions. But then the radicals, the Antifa types, came in and got hold of that situation, tried to wrestle it away. They've dragged some of the BLM protesters, the more radical elements, into their group. And so now you have this kind of mishmash going on. You have BLM, the original sort of peaceful protesters. You have the radical Antifa. And then you have those people in the middle who Antifa have managed to drag in to their radical way of thinking. So you're seeing kind of a split going on here, because you're seeing some of these Black Lives Matter leaders trying to disassociate themselves with the more radical elements. And so the fact that we didn't see quite the presence of Antifa we thought that we might see in larger numbers tells us that either their numbers are not as large as we thought they were, or they are now thinking twice about going out and being as out front as they have been, because now there's hundreds of them facing federal charges, and many hundreds more will be facing federal charges. There's now a task force set up by Attorney General Barr to dig into that organization and root them out. Now, what generally happens when an organization like this is in a situation where now their public presence and public activities can get them into the database of some specialized unit that's investigating them, they have a tendency to go underground. Of course, once they go underground, they can become more dangerous. But at the same time, when they go underground, that's also when they can call in the black operators. That would be Delta Force. Delta Force is the black operators of the Special Forces. And this is exactly the type of thing that they deal in. So if they go underground, then you'll get Delta Force involved, and they will go in and do the type of things that they do in the black arts. Needless to say, they typically will go in and begin eliminating the leadership, if you know what I mean. The leadership will begin to disappear, which breeds fear and paranoia among them, because they then begin to wonder, hey, how come our leaders are being taken out? Who's talking? Who's leaking? I mean, who's on the other team? Who's infiltrated us? They get so paranoid that they don't know who to trust. who to talk to, who not to talk to, who's ready to turn their back. It's like same way they break up the mafia. You get people inside to create fear and paranoia, so they'll be so afraid that, it's like the mafia guys when they started infiltrating them, they got so paranoid they wouldn't even talk on the phone. Would not even talk on the phone. Would not write anything down. Would not leave any records of anything. They were so paranoid. It could be one mobster talking to another mobster he'd known for 25 years, and he didn't know if he could trust this guy. So they'd have to have two guys watching every guy, two guys watching the guys watching the guys, two guys watching the guys watching the guys watching the guys. I mean, this is the type of craziness that you get into. And that's what happens when they go underground. You infiltrate them, you start taking out their leadership, you create this fear and paranoia, and pretty soon you can bust them up pretty good. Eliminate their opportunity to be cohesive, coordinated, and effective. So that is probably what we're looking at here in the future with the Antifa thugs. Or they can continue what they have been doing and do what they claim they want to do, showing up in the suburbs and neighborhoods where they will summarily get their asses kicked by residents who will protect their properties and their lives, unlike in the urban areas. Not the same type of people, not the same situation, totally different. And when they have attempted that, you can see what happens. They generally are massively outnumbered, and they get their asses kicked. So we had the Rotten Reverend Clinton the other day doing an interview with the Hollywood Reporter, where she had the audacity and stupidity to say that she would have done a better job than Trump on coronavirus. Well, nobody really believes that. She couldn't protect 4 people in Benghazi, let alone protect the country from coronavirus. She likely would have taken the position that the left was taking, because they would have pushed her there, and instead of doing what Trump did, which is shut off entry into the U.S. from China, where we would have had hundreds of thousands of more cases, which would have had millions of more people infected, the Rotten Reverend Clinton would have been pressured because of political correctness not to do that, and things would have been far worse under the Rotten Reverend. But what really stuck out in my mind in that interview is that she was asked that if she were running right now on the ticket in 2020 instead of Biden, does she think that she would beat Trump? And the way that she responded, I thought was, pretty strange. She didn't think about it, and she didn't give the pat answer you would normally expect her to give, which what you would expect her to say is, well, laugh. I'm not on the ticket. As I said, I'm not running. Joe Biden is our candidate, and yes, I believe that this is a referendum on Trump, and Joe Biden is going to win. And I'm doing everything I can to get Joe Biden elected. That's what she should have said. But that's not what she said. And it's the way that she responded and the speed with which she responded to the question. It went kind of like this. So, Hillary, if you were on the ticket now, and you were on the ticket in 2020 running against Trump, do you think you would win? Yes. That's what she said. Yes, period. And she spit it out immediately. Do you think you would win? Yes. Period. Yes. Period. Nothing further. She didn't supplement that with anything. Didn't say anything else. Just, do you think that you would win if you're running against Trump in 2020? Yes. Make of that what you will. Well, of course, this week we've got this fired U.S. Attorney, Jeffrey Berman, coming in to testify. He will be providing he's probably going to be their main witness. Of course, they had this other prosecutor, Zelensky, whatever his name is, Zelensky, in the week before, 2 weeks ago. They're getting the testimony of these people to use against Barr because they're going to try and impeach Barr. At least that's what it looks like. Both Pelosi, now that's what Schiff wants to do. But apparently Nadler and Pelosi have said no, they think it would be a waste of time. So it's hard to say what their intentions are, but we know that the Democrats have introduced a resolution to impeach Barr. The resolution is sitting there, waiting to be voted on. So the impeachment resolution for Barr is sitting there. It's in Nancy Pelosi's hands on her desk. They had Zelensky in there 2 weeks ago. Apparently there's a couple other people they're bringing in. And then this week they've got the big fish, Jeffrey Berman, who Barr just fired. and he's testifying this week. And then, of course, on July the 28th is when Barr comes in to testify himself, at which time by then they may have already passed an impeachment resolution, or they'll wait till after they question Barr and then drop the impeachment resolution, have a vote on it. They'll get the Democrat votes. They could literally get the votes in the House to impeach Barr. And that'll probably come after they interview him on the 28th. And that will be a public hearing. Now, this could very well be a trap set up by Barr. Attorney General Barr is not stupid enough, and he knows all this. He knows the impeachment resolution's there on Nancy's desk. He knows Berman's testifying this week. He knows Zelensky testified 2 weeks ago and what he said. He knows all this, but yet he agrees to testify. Now, why would he do that? Well, he's not stupid. He's not going to go in there and potentially say something that could feed the impeachment nonsense. So this has to be a trap by Attorney General Barr. He obviously believes he's a lot smarter than Nadler and Schiff and a couple of the other dopes on the committee. And he also knows you have some good Republicans, including Jim Jordan, the ranking member, who will ask him other types of questions. Now, the thing that the Democrats are going to be focusing on is how Barr and the DOJ got involved in the Roger Stone and Michael Flynn cases. And, of course, the investigation into Uncle Bob the Executioner's investigation and the FBI and what happened in 2016 and all that. So there'll be things going both ways. But for Barr to go in and testify when he knows a trap is being laid for him to go in and fall into that trap, he's too smart for that. So he must know something that we all don't know. Maybe he knows that by the time he gets in there July 28th, Durham will have already dropped his first set of indictments and will have already revealed or unraveled or made public a basic explanation for why these people are indicted and what they did. It's very, very possible that by the time Barr goes to testify that this information will have occurred and that Durham will have dropped his first couple indictments or will be damn close to it. So Barr's not stupid enough to walk into a trap. If anything, he will take the trap they're setting for him and turn it into a trap for them. And this would be one way that might happen. I don't know that. I'm just speculating here. But this past Sunday, this morning I should say, yesterday morning, Sunday morning, Maria Bartiromo was off, but they replayed a couple of the segments of her interview with Attorney General Barr, including one of the segments that was not originally there. It was obviously edited out, but it was put back in this Sunday morning. And that part of the interview is where she asked and pressed pretty hard on a series of questions asking about if the media has any sort of culpability in the crime. And I thought Barr's answer was pretty interesting. For the most part, he said, well, it's pretty hard to go after journalists because they have a certain right. But he said, now, if they, there's some things that could get into which would be a problem. And he did tell Maria Bartiromo, he fully acknowledged that the media was driving it. That's his words. That the whole Russia collusion, the whole 9 yards, the Mueller investigation, all this, and everything that's been going on, the Flynn case and everything, he said, that the media certainly has been driving it. And that would fit in to what he was talking about when he answered a question about, does it mean that journalists can just do anything? No, they can't just do anything. They have certain ability to get information, but there is a line that they can cross. And again, he will not say whether or not they've crossed that line or whether they're looking at that, whether there could be. But, Michael Isikoff was basically working for the Clinton campaign. I mean, he was a Clinton operative. You can say he was a journalist, but he was essentially operating as a Clinton campaign worker. And the same is true of Alexandra Chalupa. She was essentially operating for the Clinton campaign. But something else he said, what I think is real important. He said, quote, President Trump was indeed targeted by various entities in a concerted effort to remove him from office. President Trump was indeed targeted by various entities in a concerted effort to remove him from office.